Hello, everyone. Good night. We are here again. Thanks to welcome for the second season of this show. We're trying to make you meet each one of your favorite authors and bloggers and other people and make them feel like more human, less just in the Twitter, in the picture, in the profile. So this time I have this amazing person. I'm following him from many years ago. But in that time when I started following him was just because he was very nice on Twitter. He published many nice things, but I can listen his podcast because in that moment I can understand any word on English, and he talks usually very fast. Now that I understand after 2, 3 years of classes, I'm listening all the episodes over and over. So my guest here is Tom. He's very well known in the community because he's the podcaster behind Inciting a Riot, and he's very well known also like Fire Lead, the author of the Dabbler's Guide to Witchcraft, that is available everywhere. How are you doing, Dom?
I am so good. Thank you so much for having me here. It's such an honor.
I'm super happy that you accept. I'm really glad for this. You are a very centered person, very ground in the earth. People really like that from you. You have a very good career here. I mean, you are someone that everybody knows who is, if they like it or not, but everybody knows who you are.
Oh gosh.
Everybody knows who you are. Even I mean, you have a podcast, and everybody knows in this community how much important is that podcast because we have many spaces here, but most of these spaces are just let me talk about the same things over and over. And I remember when I started following you years ago, was because you have Twitter and you sometimes made this some kind of a statement and made me think like, oh, he have a point here. He's talking about the truth here. You have a podcast. In that moment, I can't listen to the podcast because I really don't understand English in that moment. I started my classes 3 years ago. Now I listen to your podcast and it's like, wow, this person really knows what he's doing. Really, you have another person? I don't know. Uh, and I'm really glad for that, for the work that you are doing. I remember in 2020 was a very stressful year for everyone, and you was doing your work. You continue, was like example to follow because you see the waves coming and you continue running again. And that was a very good example for this community. And in representation of a lot of people like in this community, we really say thanks to you for that.
Oh, well, that's really kind. Thank you so much.
So now let me torture you with this. First of all, my first question for you is, which is your city? Where do you live? And what is your favorite thing about your city, about the place where you live?
So we live in the Chicago suburbs, the surrounding area of Chicago. And I am from a really small town in Texas originally. And, we've moved here in 2009. So I've been here a while now, but I don't think I've ever quite gotten used to the fact that like I can get food delivered to my house. That wasn't the thing where I grew up. Sidewalks, that's still it's just I did not grow up around sidewalks. To me, the most interesting part about it is that it's a real place where people live. But I think the best part of Chicago is that it feels like, I know this is such a weird thing to say, it feels like a place where people live. It's not just a place where people like go to work. Like you go to like New York or something and it's all just like very, I don't know, for me, Chicago feels like there's a wonderful arts community. There's a wonderful writers community. There's an amazing music and food. There's just a lot of culture here. And I really love that it feels like a place where people come to live and to thrive and to grow and to, sort of express themselves. I love that.
That's great. It's like, for the description that you give me, like really a place where you can sit down and make a life. Because like you mentioned, New York is people running all the time. And I live in here and I see people come, make a work, and they go out because it's like not a place to stay, not for everybody really.
Right.
Yeah. So Thanks for that, because I don't know the country, so I like to make that question because I like to visualize how is the life of other people in the same country. You start podcasting many years ago. Tell me how this start. How start this inciting a riot? Because the title is very big, and now you are changing the direction. How was this process for you?
Yeah. So I started podcasting in 2009. I had been blogging a little bit in my senior year of college. I had just graduated college. So sort of like a lot of these young up and coming witchy influencers now, that was me when I started out. Uh, I was very new to podcasts. And at the time, it was just kind of sort of like a personal blog almost. I mean, these days a podcast is a very serious thing, but they're businesses, and NPR has them, and news stations and famous people have podcasts. But back when I started, it was just sort of like a joke, like, oh, I bet he makes podcasts in his basement or something like that. But I don't know. It was just for me personally, it was a fun way to kind of engage with community. Like I said, I'm from a really small town, so but even when we moved here, finding community, finding other people that thought like I thought or wanted to have the kinds of conversations that I wanted to have, a lot of that happened for me online. Witchvox and finding blogs and that kind of thing, and podcasts were a pretty new thing. That was back in the day of like the Wigglian Way and Dio's Shadow and just a handful of other little shows. There weren't that many, and when I started, it was just sort of there were a few things. I remember one of the things that was kind of a hot topic of the day was people were kind of reckoning with the fact that a lot of Murrayite theories, Margaret Murray's theories about like the witch cult of Western Europe and stuff, a lot of those things were starting to be discussed about how they don't hold up to history. They have been debunked, and yet we continue to publish them in witchy books without any kind of vetting or fact checking. And a lot of those kinds of things were being talked about, but nobody was actually just saying out loud that they were not true. And I was like, but we all know they're not true. Why don't we just say that? And there were a few little topics of the day when I was like, well, if we all know it's not true, or if we all know we're not supposed to do this, but nobody says it because we're kind of afraid of, and we still are like this. People are still kind of afraid to share an opinion, not even share an opinion, share a proven fact, share a fact that is proven by history, by peer review, by science, by math, whatever it is. Share a perspective that is backed up by evidence, and then we're kind of scared to do that because it's not as fun as some of the other topics people like to bring up. So I started a show called Inciting a Riot because I was like, well, I'll say it. and for good or for ill, I was a very young child that had a lot of hot takes and a lot of opinions, much like a lot of the new witchy influencers these days. So I have a lot of empathy and sympathy for them because you go to college, you read a lot of books, you think you know a lot of stuff, and then you come out and you start spitting out piss and vinegar, and then you get a little bit more perspective and realize, hey, maybe stop talking so much and maybe start doing some more listening, which is how you mentioned that my podcast is transitioning from Inciting a Riot to Head on Fire, because I want to be a seeker again. I feel like the tone of Inciting a Riot was very pointed, and at times, oftentimes, it could become antagonistic. And as I grew up, that vibe, that tenor, that tone, that doesn't serve me anymore. That doesn't really fit with who I am as a person anymore. I don't think that I know everything. I'm happy to defer to experts. I know where my lane is, and I try very, very hard to stay in that lane. And if an important conversation needs to happen, I have at least learned that my voice is probably not the one that needs to have that conversation. We need to be spotlighting the people doing the real work and spotlighting the communities and cultures affected, if such a conversation arises. So I wanted to put myself back in a seeker's perspective, and I wanted to acknowledge the fact that we are not just spiritual, we're not just witches, we're not just magical practitioners, we exist in a wider world. And so many people are coming to this form of spirituality, to they're having spiritual explorations because the spirituality that they grew up with, the religion or the upbringing or whatever, it doesn't fit with the world in which they live. It's not the kinds of conversations that they are having. It's not inclusive of gender or sexual orientation or identity, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. At times it butts up against issues of science and ecology and preservation and things like that. So a lot of people are kind of wandering and trying to create a version of a spiritual life that isn't myopic, that isn't just so short-sighted and so centered on just the witchcraft and just the magic all the time. So that's the direction that I want to go, is to have conversations with people in interesting, often overlooked subjects, experts in fields that we think we know a lot about. And I'm really excited because I've got some upcoming interviews with people I've always wanted to talk to, that just didn't quite fit in that very narrow lane that Inciting a Riot needed to be when it was just trying to be a podcast aimed at witchy people. I was always trying to find a way to take this conversation and make it witchy or try to make it apply back to us. And I'm like, you know what? We're people. We are still people existing out here. And it's okay for us to have bigger, broader reaching conversations. So that's the direction of the show.
I really appreciate that. We can pass hours listening to you.
Thank you.
Yes, it's true. I remember that you were, because you are a very woken person. You really know what are you doing, and you have different to other people in this community or in any community. You sit down and you question yourself. I am the correct person to bring this topic. I remember that you were podcasting before this was something cool. I remember that you were talking about hot topics before this was something cool. Now everybody does. I remember that even sometimes you post something on Twitter that, for example, you say, for example, if you are not a psychologist, you shouldn't be talking about this. And me, like a person with a background, person like, how he dares to publish something like that. And then half hour after that is like, yeah, he had the reason. I'm not a psychologist, so I should take down a little bit this topic because I'm not the correct person for this. Like you say, sometimes we are not the voice. We want to do it, but we are not the qualified people for that. And something that I really appreciate from you, and you know this because I mentioned it before, is I remember when 2020 happens, I mean, for immigrants in this country, we were living 4 very complicated years, wherever is the side that you are, like immigrant, wherever is your side, anyway, this was a struggle for you. And in that moment, COVID happens, and we were thinking about the third world war, and a lot of things were happening, and the Me Too movement, the Black Lives Matter movement, and everybody was, the typical, I use the hashtag, I am so cool, I'm supporting people, but nobody really was taking actions. And you was not just using the hashtag. You was not using the hashtag. You was raising voices. You was inviting people to your podcast to talk about these topics. You was sharing lists about these people. You was trying to, this is the problem. So let me reanalyze all the problem for you, and let me put this problem in the spotlight with the experts. And in that year, I was starting to listen to your podcast because in that moment I was very advanced on English. So, now I can reach the podcast. I can listen to him. I can understand what he says. And I remember all of these very deep conversations about Black Lives Matter, about sexuality, about religion, all of these hot topics that nobody else wants to talk because I'm going to make people uncomfortable, so people don't go to like me. But you don't care about that. Your care is, this is the truth, so somebody needs to talk about the truth. And a lot of people really appreciate that. I appreciate that. And a lot of followers and leaders of mine really appreciate that because we're in a community where everybody is trying to be liked. Because if you are not liked, you don't sell books, you don't sell podcasts, you don't sell anything. And if you are not liked, it's like, if people don't like me, so people don't go to invite me to interviews, people don't go to buy my book, people don't go to invite me to events, people don't go to invite me to classes. So they stop embracing and sharing the truth for money. You don't do that. You do the contrary. And we see that. I mean, people is watching that. People is seeing that. And you have your podcast, and now you are changing in another direction. And in that moment, you was working on this book, about which I have a lot of questions. First of all, how, because you said that you were very witchy in the college, but how did you discover witchcraft? How was this path for you?
I was about 15 or 16 years old, and I was in band. I played the French horn. And I was just, I was the kid that grew up reading a lot of mythology. I read a lot of Edith Hamilton and Arthur Cotterell and encyclopedias on mythology, and just any little book that I could get my hand on. I was just always very interested in the gods that people very much used to believe in. But for me, that was the thing people used to do. I had no basis to think that people still did that. I was just always fascinated with it. I remember, I've talked about this before, my parents had a book, Witches, Pumpkins, and Grinning Ghosts, that was brought out every Halloween. And it was sort of like the true history of Halloween. Now, to be real honest, if you go look it up, it kind of plays fast and loose with history. But for me as a kid, I'm surprised they let me have that book, because it depicts, witches' sabbats, like actual witches' sabbat, like with the devil and stuff. Like, I mean, it's crazy. So it had always fascinated me, but I never thought that it was something that was real. I mean, who does? You get fascinated with it from TV and film or books or something. And then I was like 15 or 16 years old, and my friend and band, who just happened to sit next to me, she had Earth, Air, Fire, and Water by Scott Cunningham, and she was reading it, and it said More Techniques of Natural Magic. And it was sitting in her seat, and she was up walking around, and I was like, what is this? I thought it was a fantasy novel. I picked it up and I read some pages, and I was like, what is this? And she said, oh, it's just some reading material. She let me borrow the book, and oh my God, my life was changed. I started sneaking around the back sections of bookstores and going and getting those books. I think I got a DJ Conway book. I got all of the Scott Cunningham that was available at the time. I just started devouring books. I turned my nightstand into a little altar, and I would like tuck things away. I got bit by the bug pretty hard early on, which means that I've sort of been on this path ever since for 20 years. So, which tells you how old I am.
Yeah, but this is years of experience. It's something that most people now we don't appreciate, because you come from the time where you go to the library to find the books. Now everybody finds things on the internet, and you see these guys, they go to internet, oh, this is witchcraft, this is witch, oh, let me read 2 blogs, and the next day I am a witch, I am a tarot reader, I'm asking money for readings and to spell work, and I have a Twitter, and I'm very popular.
Hasn't that always been, when I first got online, before I ever had a podcast, back in that 2007, 8, 9 era, when I was just kind of exploring online, that's really common. That's always been a thing. I start reading tarot, and then a month later I'm selling tarot service. It's just, I think it's always been a part of our community, or our I don't know. I think part of what fascinates people, that gets people interested in the concept of witchcraft and magic and stuff, is, the wall of jars, the deck of cards, is the communal act of serving the community with spiritual services. And at once that feels good, but the problem is, people seem to get hung up on the only way that I could do that is to hang a tile out in the world and to start to sell things. And it's like, you are selling things you barely understand yourself, you do not have enough experience with. Gosh, if I want to go practice medicine, I need to graduate high school or get an equivalency degree. I need a bachelor's degree. I need a medical degree. Sometimes I need a graduate degree. There's internships and postdoctoral work and, all sorts. It's just, 20 something years of schooling start to finish to become a doctor. And I realized that kind of truncates, because once you learn how to learn, you can learn things more quickly. But so many of the way that we offer services now is pretty medicalized. I mean, and people without any certification, they just want their wall of jars, and they hear a malady and they're like, oh, go bathe in this mugwort juice. Okay, don't do that. Don't just give people giant bottles of mugwort. That's not good. It requires no expertise. It requires no certification. So there's really no way to know how somebody came to be the expert and why that person's the expert. And it's all, but to just echo your point, it's kind of always been a problem. And I think it's always going to be a problem.
Yes, I had in that moment like 17 or 16. I was in Orinoco, that is a river that we have in Amazonas, next connected Brazil to Venezuela. And this person was some kind of anthropologist, I think, and a teacher from some kind of college. Don't talk Spanish, but this guy was a very old man. Was like his second visit to Amazonas. And the last time that he comes, before that, he was in the Amazon for like 3-4 weeks. Now he comes 2-3 years later, and he is staying in Amazonas for like in the Orinoco. He was checking the tribes, which herbs we have, what is the kind of food that we have. He was just for some months. He go back to, I think that was go back to United States. Then months later, we see him in the news because he was the expert in the Amazonas tribes. And he was writing books about it. And we were just thinking at that moment, I was next to my mom, and I remember my mom was furious. My mom was using all kind of language. And I was just thinking, the guy just come here 2 times, one for weeks, one for months, and now he's the expert, and he published books and this kind of thing. So I grew up with that. I remember that it's like a little trauma that I have. So sometimes when I see these kind of things around, just remind me that situation. Like, my mom could be the expert, but she's not, and she lives here. And you come here for 3 months and you are the expert because you say that, because you have a louder voice, a platform, so you can say that you are the expert. And that is what sometimes bothers me when I see that around. You see these people, but I learn looking for listening to harmony. Remember, most of these people are children, so try to be calm many times. So sometimes like, okay, just relax. They are children. They are starting, and the arrogance that when we are younger that we think that we know better, that happens. Sometimes I continue thinking that I know better. That continue happening. So
sure.
My next question here. This is super silly questions. Do you remember first, which was the first book on witchcraft that you buy for yourself? And did you remember which was your first spell?
It was the first book that I bought for myself. I think I bought that duplicated copy of Earth, Air, Fire, and Water. And then after that, it was I bought a Scott Cunningham book. I am almost positive it was Earth Power, which was actually the first in his sort of Earth Magic series. And then I bought a DJ Conway book that I think was like Celtic Magic or something like that. That didn't jive with me because it needed a lot more swords than I had. So I didn't love that one. Oh gosh, my first spell. I remember my first spell, and it didn't come from a Scott Cunningham book. It came from that Witches, Pumpkins, and Grinning Ghosts book, because in that book, they talked about how some ancient cultures did, it was believed that they did magic with art, with drawing. and you would draw what you wanted to happen, and then it would happen. And I remember I did something like that. I drew out what I wanted to happen, and that was my first spell. I think that was in like middle school. That was before I knew that like real witches existed. I was still just kind of hunting around in like Halloween books and like trying stuff out. But yeah, that was the first.
Thanks for the answer. Did you identify yourself like a witch or a magician, a magic worker?
Witch has always felt probably the most comfortable. Pagan has felt very comfortable as well, though I realize those are not the same thing. I'm not saying they are. I'm just saying those two labels tend to feel the most comfortable. Yeah. Magician, wizard, mage, that kind of thing, that has always felt a little D&D to me personally. But that's just my vibe. I totally respect anybody that uses those kinds of labels. That's never really applied to me.
Got it. Complicated question. How do you feel that was 2020 for you?
Oh, that's a weird answer. 2020 was weird because 2020 is weird for everybody, but I was very, very blessed that for the majority of that year, I was in a position where I could work from home. So I was very fortunate that when the worst of it was going on, my husband and I, our basic needs were met, which is a lot luckier than a lot of other people had. And that was also the year that I said, well, I've always said, if I had more time, I would write a book. If I had more time, if I had more time, if I had more time. And a very dear friend of mine and I had, we had said this to each other for years, and I'd self-published, independently published a couple of books on, just some poetry collections. Mm-hmm. I've published a couple of poetry books, but, I'd never, taken my chance at a novel or anything else. And I was like, let's take a run at it. And it was amazing. Like once I started working, suddenly I had opportunities. Suddenly, Dabbler's Guide happened. That still shocks me. I never thought I was going to write a book about witchcraft or magic. I never thought that anybody would want to hear what I had to say on it. I really thought that a book like that could not be written. A book like that could not exist. So I was writing a novel, and then I just kind of ended up on Simon & Schuster's radar, thanks to some blogs that I had written. And, we had some conversations, and I said, well, if you're wanting a book about witchcraft, this is the book that I would want to write. And they were like, okay, yep, that's it. So, that's how that happened. But yeah, 2020, I ended up actually, I haven't talked about this publicly. I did end up losing my job because they ended up cutting a lot of our department around the end of October. But then I had a book contract with Simon & Schuster, which kind of carried me through to the next couple of months. So then I spent a few more months writing that. And then, by the time I was done with the book, I found a new job and went to a new job. So it was a really weird time, and I'm very, very grateful that we were able to make it through how we did.
I need to ask you, how was this process? Because like you said, this is a book that, and I suggest this to everybody. Like for people who follow me on social media, they know that I have many copies of the book. I have like 5 or 6 that I give to my friends every time.
Oh, thank you.
Yes. Actually, I bought one. I don't take the picture, I promise, because I know was very well dressed that day. It was a very rainy day after a very cold day in New York, and I find your book in the Barnes and Noble of 5th Avenue, and I, wow, here is the book. So I don't take my typical picture because I was well dressed that day. This is a book that people really should read. tell me how was it for you, because I read it and it's entirely different to any other book on witchcraft that we have, because we have this commercial structure. Because before being a published author, I worked for a publisher house in my country, and I remember the structure of every book on witchcraft is what is magic, what is being a witch, the phases of the moon, put a bunch of spells in there, in the book. That.
Yep.
Put a title. And this is not like that. This don't follow that structure, but it's very interesting. How was this for you? Because it's entirely
most books about magic end up being about 30 to 50,000 words, which is actually a really short book. I don't think people realize they pick up like a 200-page book, but there aren't actually that many.
Sorry, I lost you for a second. You for a second. Give us a minute and we will be back because we lost the connection for a moment. Oh, my friend just, I lost him. Let me fix this very, very fast. We're back.
But yeah, so a lot of books about magic tend to actually be fairly short, because it's almost like they're writing a recipe book. There's a big focus on doing the magic. There's a big focus on spells. And I get that, right? Like you go to the witchy section of the bookstore, especially as a new seeker, right? Like as a new kind of dabbler, you're wanting a book that's like
Yes,
going to tell you want to go
want
directly to do the magic. You want to go buy some candles. I mean, I opened the book with a made up story, Todd just broke up with you and you want to go curse Todd. You want to turn Todd into a toad. So you're trying to find a book that can turn Todd into a toad. And I get that. I did the same thing. I opened my Scott Cunningham, I try all the spells, and then I read the first few chapters. And so many people are looking for those books. And so many people look for those books because that's kind of all we write, or that's all we wrote for decades, or at least that's all it felt like we wrote. I mean, book after book after book was just 40 pages of theory and then 150 pages of spells. So people almost didn't know what to do with a book like mine. Or other books like it that are just like, let's talk about something else. That we are more than just doing spells. If you want a book about 150 spells to do X, Y, or Z, there are 8 cajillion books out there for you. My book is not that. I set out, my book ended up being like 98,000 words, and there's no pictures. it's just straight up chapters. Because I said, I want a book for the spiritually curious person who's coming to this path that, like I said, is looking for a version of magic, is looking for a version of witchcraft that is inclusive of the kind of life that they live, is inclusive of the kinds of conversations that they're having in their daily life, right? And that is inclusive of science and psychology and sociology, and is culturally aware, and is it reflects the kind of practice that I have and my friends have and the people that I know and love have, is kind of saying the quiet part out loud. So when I wrote the book, I said, sure, I'll do some of these intro chapters of what's a witch, but I didn't want to just do like, here's my definition of a witch. I wanted to break down like why you think a witch is what it is. Like, let's talk about the media, but let's not just talk about pop culture and witchcraft. Like, let's talk about what this has done to prime your brain to think about minority cultures, generally speaking. Let's talk about the ways that media fiction, supernatural TV shows, fantasy shows, all of that kind of thing primes the pump, primes your brain to sort of think about certain kinds of cultures in certain ways. Like we talk about the way that American Horror Story kind of has overwhelmed the internet with a version of Papa Legba that does not exist in real culture. But when you go to search for him, you see the version that's that's the Papa Legba from American Horror Story, which is not Papa Legba in the real culture from which he comes. So I just wanted to sort of talk to people in the beginning of like, okay, we're going to break down some of your preconceived notions, and then I'm going to teach you how to sort of break these things down. So instead of writing an entire book about like, here's Firelight's version of witchcraft, I instead wanted to write a book that sort of teaches you how to think critically about building out a spiritual life that's tailored to you. I didn't want to give you a Wicca washed version of witchcraft. I didn't want to, here's your athame, here's your wand, here's your whatever. I didn't want to give you a dumbed down version of traditional witchcraft or whatever modern witchcraft. I didn't want to give you an instruction booklet for how to do what I consider witchcraft or my pagan practice. This isn't about my pagan practice. I wanted to teach you how to go out and critically consume magical books, critically consume magical information. And so that's what I hope I did.
Yes, you are mentioning Papa Legba. I remember, I don't remember the series. I'm not too much in pop culture, I'm not too much in TV shows. But I was watching this show or film that someone recommended me. Is this witches or
American Horror Story Coven? It was season 3. Yep.
No, I don't remember. I remember American Horror Story. But I see this other series that someone recommended me, and some witches visit Santera because we need to use this spell of Santeria. And they were like, I am initiating Lukumi, so I am a Santero. And it's not like people come to the home, oh, you have a spell of Santeria for this? It's not like you give a spell to someone else. This is an initiation ritual, cool religion, Afro-Caribbean for other kind of people. It's complicated. And when you put these kind of things in TV shows, people turn confused and they think because they don't want to read, they think that this is the truth. Like this is the Papa Legba because we are a TV show and we know better. So, and people grow up with that. People who don't have access to books, many times happens, they create a whole ideology based on this, and it's a lie. It's not like that. It's complicated. It's very incorrect. It's that you just remind me that I was watching that with my husband. Like, that is not like that. I mean, you don't arrive to the house of someone like I come to your home. Oh, give me a spell, write it for someone like you for this situation. No, you need that the witch make the spell. You don't take the spell for you. It was complicated. You remind me that with the Papa Legba of them. Mm-hmm. Something else that you want, because those were my 7 questions. Is anything else that you want to share?
Oh my gosh, I am an open book, and I've got plenty of time. So if you have anything else, I'm happy to answer.
Okay, which is your because you are doing this whole change of we're going to call it a marketing change. It's not that.
Sure. Rebranding.
Rebranding. You're changing from Inciting a Riot, Firelight to Hellfire. So which is your next phase? How are you embracing this phase for you? Because you are doing it and we know now why you are doing it. How is this process for you? You feel it like it's easier than when you started? It's more difficult than you were expecting?
So I actually had been toying with the idea of doing away with Inciting a Riot and either creating a new show or just stopping podcasting altogether in 2019, which is weird because that's kind of when Inciting a Riot came back and started getting a whole new audience. And I thought that because I was like, well, I started the show in 2009 and it had this just exponential upward trajectory until 2016, at which point there was just a whole lot of problems with the internet. I mean, the internet was in this big transitional time. My show had gotten a little too big, and it had upset a little too many people. folks were posting my personal information online. Somebody had called my house. Somebody came to my job. There were stalker problems. It got really scary, and I shut down basically all of my inciting a riot, firelight, mostly social media in 2016. And I had done like 100 something shows in the first like 5-6 years of the podcast. And then in the next 3 years, I think I did like 10 shows, something like that. I mean, I barely put anything out. And it was just kind of every now and then when I kind of felt like doing it, I would do it like a hobby. But then, 2019 came around. It was like, it's the 10th anniversary of the show. I either need to decide, am I gonna go for it? Am I gonna try to make this into something? Am I gonna put some effort into it? And or am I gonna end it? And I kind of thought, let's do a combination of both. I'm gonna put some effort into it. We're gonna talk to some people. We're gonna have some good conversations, and we're gonna go out on a high note. And that didn't happen. It kind of got away from me again, but in a really good way this time. I retooled the show so that it was more of an interview format. And then 2020 happened, and suddenly people wanted pagan conversations from a socially, culturally aware context, which is what my show had always put out. But nobody ever wanted that before. Nobody had ever wanted that before. Nobody wanted to listen to that. Nobody wanted to tune into my show and then listen to somebody talk about being a mom living on the Israeli-Palestinian border. Like, nobody wanted to talk to that because they were like, well, where's the witchcraft? Where's the pagan practice? Yada, yada. And suddenly, 2019, 2020 happened, and people finally were like, oh, I'm looking for this. This is exactly what I want. I want to be more aware. I want to know what's going on around me. So I kept producing the show, and I kept producing the show. And but I kept toying with, like, I was like, well, the vibe of inciting a riot and the entire concept of having a dual identity, it was just kind of weighing on me, because I was like, this vibe doesn't feel right for me. It's not who I am. I'm not as angry as I was. I'm not as antagonistic as I was. I mean, I certainly still have some opinions. And I'm certainly not shy. But I think I've learned a lot more, like, how to have those kinds of conversations and when to not center myself, hopefully. And if I mess up, I've learned how to own that mistake. And so I finally said, well, I think I'm going to keep doing the show, and I think I want to keep doing the show, and I think I want to continue having these kinds of conversations and letting this podcast evolve. But in order to do that, I was just like, I need to be myself, and I need to be myself publicly. And myself isn't somebody that is quite as pointed or antagonistic or ready to like make you feel bad as I feel like Firelight is perceived. And so I just, I want to be myself. I want to be myself online. I want credit for my own work. Basically, I want to be me. And with that came kind of a tone shift, which I hope you'll see. I've already recorded a few shows for the new relaunch happening next in February, which by the time this show comes out, there will already have been episodes. And I think I just, it's really cool, because as soon as that switch happened, suddenly doors were opening again. Suddenly people wanted to talk to me. I decided, I want to start talking to interesting, cool people that aren't necessarily authors of witchy books, and I just kind of gave myself permission to do that. I was like, I don't know who I'm waiting on. I don't know what permission I'm waiting on.
It's great that you decide to not quit on this, because we need these spaces. The thing that you said, that people sometimes don't want this kind of podcast, or don't want to listen this. I think that from my perspective, it's that sometimes we just have the fear to ask.
Mm-hmm.
Because, for example, I grew up in a different country where if you ask for something different, everybody look at you very bad. Now we have Twitter and Facebook, and everybody has opinions, and most of the times opinions are not answers or questions or guidance. Most of the times are statements, very strong statements. And when you say, oh, I'm thinking maybe we could try or look for something different, everybody comes after you. So with the time, you just stop asking. And when you see that all of these podcasts has exactly the same topics, the same people, the same interviews, the same conversations over and over, and finally someone there is doing a different job, is making questions. It's not, these are all the spells, is why we have all of these spells. Why you need to do the spell? Why you call yourself a witch? Why you are doing this? Why you're venerating these gods? When someone is doing those questions, these people who usually feel like mistreated or outsiders, it's like, oh, we have a space that we can support for. So thank you for not quit on this. We embrace the rebranding. We love it. And all the links to my friend will be in the description of the video. I was thinking of another question, but I just I remember the question. Did you practice any kind of divination, or you have any divination tool?
Oh yeah. I mean, I think like everybody else, I use the tarot, and I have a go-to deck that I use. I always pick up the Druidcraft Tarot to do my normal readings, but I do love a good deck. I did love the new Modern Witch Tarot by Lisa Sturl. I just got the Magical Tarot deck by Robin Valentine, illustrated by Stacia Barrington, I want to say. The Mystical Medleys Tarot was new. The Disney Villains deck, I think I've had. And there's, oh gosh, I mean, I think I did a whole deck tour one time. I think I've got a DC deck. I think I've got, anyways. So yeah, I use tarot. Let's see, other forms of divination that I have used or that I use on occasion. Mirrors. I've got a black mirror, mirror and a candle wax and water. Oh gosh, I love a spirit board. Those are fun. Those are fun to break out around Halloween. That's good times. Let's see. I mean, I'm just kind of open and curious and always interested in using kind of different forms of magic. I've got a couple of books that I remember Jillian Kemp, I think, wrote, that I remember playing around with, like playing cards. Corey Hutchison wrote a really good book. I think he called it 54 Devils, that teaches you how to read with playing cards. And that's actually how I taught myself before I got my first tarot deck, because I could hide playing cards because they were just playing cards, but I couldn't hide tarot decks very well. So yeah. I use a lot of different ones, yeah, but I don't like offer spiritual services. I'm not a professional or anything. I read for myself and my family.
So people, if you see any kind of profile readings, is the proof.
It's not me. I don't read publicly, mostly because, like, well, one, I don't I could put a lot of excuses about it, but I don't. There's a million other readers out there that are probably far better than me, and they do that quite well, and they fill that space. You don't need one more witchy podcaster trying to also be a tarot reader. It's not. I'm good.
Wait for the tarot reader tour, maybe the tarot deck tour, maybe for Instagram, for a reel or a video. That will be very entertaining.
I have actually thought about designing my own deck, because I'm also an artist, and I've played around. I've played around with a couple of designs before. I may do that one day, not now, but maybe one day.
Exactly, no pressure, but will be very cool. Which is what you like more about the craft, and what is what you like less about the craft?
I personally, what I love about my pagan practice is how it really has influenced my my social and cultural sensibilities. How in order for me to say that I have a spiritual reverence for the natural cycles of life, of the earth, of my fellow man, that has really challenged me and influenced me to sort of, you know, put my money where my mouth is, so to speak, to really own up to where I could improve about being a good steward of the land that I live on, the ways that I interact with other people, the kinds of things that I put out into the world, and just, you know, helps to remind me to slow down and appreciate nature and the world that I live on, and that kind of thing. I think, I don't know, I don't know about a thing I like the least. The thing I like the least about my personal practice, that's what I'll do. The thing I like the least about my personal practice is feeling bad if I miss a moon phase or something. Like, you know, you get busy and you wake up the next day and you're like, ah, shit, it was the full moon. Like, ah, crap. Like, ah. So, you know, this, all things are always happening. So, you know, there's, yeah, maybe that.
I remember months ago, you was, I think that the first person in my life that I see in the path of witchcraft or magic who admit and say publicly, I forget the moon and it's okay. And everybody was like, oh, a witch who don't know that we have the full moon today. And actually that happens all the time.
Oh, yeah.
Most
Thorn
of,
Mooney, I really loved her new book, The Witch's Path. Sorry, I was thinking of her original title, The Witch's Path, because in her intro, she talked about the fact that as she was sitting there writing it, it was a full moon outside, and she should probably be doing some ritual, and she was not. She was sitting on her couch, she was reading and writing, and she was drinking a glass of wine, and that was going to be it for her that night. And I was like, I have never related to anything more. Because, you know, 20 years into my practice, you know, sometimes you miss some things and it's okay. The moon is going to be there. In fact, the moon is still there. The moon is always there. We know that now. We are not primitive man. We know the moon doesn't go away. It's always there. So it's fine. Forgive yourself. It's just an optical illusion anyways. So chill.
Exactly. That always happens. And I am rounded for a lot of witches. I have my coven, I have 2 covens. And all the time it's normal that people forget that, but nobody admits it. You are like the first person who really admit that. Oh, I forget that we have the full moon today. Oh, yeah, we are having it, but it's not like we have the calendar everywhere. Everybody's working, everybody's studying, everybody have a different life or different schedule. So it's pretty normal that. Tom, I really don't have more questions for you now. I'm really super glad, super happy to that you accept to do this, because I was thinking to invite you before your book comes out. But the truth is, and I told you, I find you a little intimidating.
Oh
So
gosh, no.
So I just really think I have my list, because I have a list of all the guests for every season, and I was like, I don't know how he will respond. So maybe later, because I am a total coward. I don't like when people say no to me because I start crying. So maybe later when I feel more brave.
Oh, I would always say yes to you. Of course, you're a wonderful light in our community, and I'm so happy to know you and call you a friend. So, of course, I will always answer your call, and I am happy to hop on a chat anytime. You are wonderful, and what you do is wonderful. So, thank you so much for the honor of being here.
Thank you, and I hope that you can that we can repeat this.
Of course.
Any project that you have in the future. For everybody watching this, all the links to my friend are below in the description. His book in local stores, in Amazon, Barnes & Noble, everywhere. His podcast, I think that he has Patreon, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. All the links that you are looking for are here below in the description, okay?
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody, and thank you to my friend for taking the time for making this. Bye, everyone. Blessings to everyone.